and also he is an industrial organizational psychologist. And John has designed and developed the new course on virtual and hybrid events that we are going to be offering, and he is also going to be leading that course. So today we're going to talk about what he has to tell us about virtual and hybrid events, as well as what kinds of things we're going to see in the course. So welcome, John.
Thank you for having me, Deborah.
So just to lead off, what are virtual and hybrid events? What are we really talking about here?
Great. Good questions to start with. So virtual events involve people interacting in a virtual environment instead of an actual physical one. And hybrid events simultaneously involve one group of participants interacting in a virtual environment, while a separate group of individuals interact in actual physical one. So it's a combination of both, the best of both worlds, if you will. The virtual and hybrid events have actually been around for decades. The pandemic has actually accelerated the rate of adoption, how many individuals and organizations are actually using virtual or hybrid events. But the challenge for event professionals these days is to really accelerate the pace of utilization. And that's how efficient or how effective these virtual or hybrid events can be. And that's really the goal of this webinar, to really help event professionals produce the most efficient and effective virtual and hybrid events. Mm-hmm. Well, virtual and hybrid events, you've probably been hearing a lot about them. They are, and I agree with most of the thought leaders on this, that they are not going away once in-person events return. They will, however, need to be better at delivering key individual and organizational outcomes, which they currently are not. So we're looking at making these the best they possibly can be.
And so why, as an event planner, would it be important for me to understand some things about virtual and hybrid events? Why can't I just use what I already know about planning events?
Yeah, so virtual events and hybrid events, they provide business with several advantages. So, despite the fact that they are not as commonly used within the events industry as outside of the events industry, virtual events are usually less costly to produce than in-person events, and that's a huge advantage for organizations that want to use them. Virtual events can also reach a larger, more diverse audience much more easily than you can with an in-person event. And finally, virtual events are key to really building online communities. And I think this is a real key differentiator. Ultimately, I think the highest order purpose that in-person events really serve is community building. I can't think of a higher order purpose for in-person events. And virtual events or hybrid events, because of their advantages, are really much more effective at doing this than the in-person events can possibly do. So in short, virtual and hybrid events provide businesses with a real competitive advantage if they are done right. And again, this course is all about doing virtual events right. So successful virtual events require really an intimate understanding of your audience's wants and needs. These wants and needs determine your event design and inform the development, the delivery, and the evaluation of your event content. Each of these elements contribute in their own way to individual and organizational performance outcomes, which are really, as far as I'm concerned, the only outcomes that really matter when we're talking about events.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of the skills that you need or the competencies that you need, what are some of the competencies that are additional to what you may already know as a event planner, as a professional?
Yeah, this is a great question because we're all familiar with the competencies required to produce successful in-person events. And these are found in the meetings and business event competency standards, or the MBECs. And some of those core competencies include, and these will be familiar to most event professionals, project management, for example, financial management for developing budgets and managing costs and revenues. Site management in an in-person context is really critical, as well as stakeholder management and risk management. These are the core competencies of in-person event professionals. But the hybrid in the virtual world is really different than an in-person world. And so it requires different types of competencies, different knowledge, different skills, different abilities. And I've identified some of those for this course. And I'll just give you a handful of them here. Some of the competencies I think are going to be important going forward in terms of virtual and hybrid events are something called interaction design, which is really about the interface between devices and the human experience. And there's a lot of people that focus on this interaction design, how to make these technologies and these devices that we use user friendly, make that sort of a user friendly experience. Then there's something called the content strategy, which has been around for a long time, used primarily for marketing purposes. But content is really much more critical in a virtual and a hybrid world than I would even argue in an in-person world. And in the in-person world, event professionals, we've never done content very well. There's really a lot of questions around who actually owns the content, who's responsible for the quality of the content, and doesn't really tie to individual organizational outcomes in a way that we can really demonstrate that these events that we're holding are worthwhile and relevant. So content strategy is really critical. In combination with content strategy is something called learning strategy. And decades of research going back tell us that the top reasons people go to meetings and events are for either the educational programs or the networking, and everything else really pales in comparison. And in my language as a learning professional, we treat these educational sessions as sort of formal learning opportunities, structured formal learning opportunities. And the networking is considered sort of an informal learning opportunity. And what we're learning is that the informal learning opportunities at meetings and events are much more relevant, much more valuable than the actual formal learning. But in each case, a learning strategy will help you get the most out of both of those opportunities. A couple of other competencies I think are critical going forward is moderation and facilitation. Again, these are professionals that are helpful in terms of attaining outcomes from events, and they're really underutilized for the most part. Everybody fancies themselves a good moderator, a good facilitator, but these individuals, these professionals have specialized skills that are really designed to help you get the most out of your particular event. So I think these competencies around moderation and facilitation are going to be much more critical going forward and should be utilized much more commonly. And the last piece I would probably add to this is analytics. I talked about financial management in terms of the core competencies for in-person events. Analytics is really financial management on steroids, if you will. It's a way to identify trends and patterns in data. Hybrid and virtual events are generating a lot more data than the typical in-person event. Sometimes by a factor of 5 to 7. And so you have a lot more data available to you. If you can mine that data and find some insights in that data to help you make more effective business decisions regarding your event, again, you're going to be much more successful and have much more successful outcomes. So those are some of the competencies I think are critical. Now, this webinar is not designed to sort of train you in each one of these competencies. We just don't have the time and the bandwidth to do that. But we believe it's important to point the way forward. And the plans are to provide some continuing education opportunities going forward so we can educate the marketplace more about these particular competencies and others.
And I'm going to ask you something in addition, though. Do I need to have good technology skills and IT skills, or is that not as important?
Great question. I make a distinction between tools and techniques. There's a lot of tools out there for virtual and hybrid events, and it's important to know enough to be dangerous. You don't necessarily have to be a technologist, but and I guess I place more of an emphasis on when you select a tool, how well do you use that tool to accomplish your objectives? We are, like a lot of other industries, we have that sort of shiny object syndrome, and we get distracted by what's new and different. And we don't spend enough time really immersing ourselves in understanding how to use these tools effectively. And that's really where I place more emphasis on.
Well, you have some of the folks who are experts in these tools participate in this course?
Yeah, I'm reaching out to my network. There are a lot of great technologically sophisticated people out there in the industry that I'm going to be tapping to come in and talk with the participants and share with them their particular take on some of the technology issues. There are some things to be aware of. The course will touch on some of these things. But because I'm not the subject matter expert in the technology as much as the technique, I want to bring in those people to sort of talk about some of these technical issues.
Great. And so just, are there a few other things that you would like us to know that the course will be addressing?
Sure. First of all, it's a very dynamic field. It's evolving all the time, and so I want to basically lay out for you what are some of the pros and cons of the different types of virtual and hybrid events. There is really no wrong or right type. It really depends on what your goals and objectives are. And audience these days are really being trained to consume a wide variety of content across multiple channels. We call this omni-channel marketing. And events should be treated really no differently or looked at no differently. So there's a shift going on in the industry. I'm looking at events as a singular place in time, a prescribed place in time. And digital and hybrid events allow us to sort of change that paradigm, if you will, and think of these events as 24/7, 365 opportunities, again, to sort of engage and build your community online. A couple of other things that we're going to talk about in the course. I talk a lot about content because, again, I think content's more critical in this virtual and hybrid world than it is in the in-person world. So how to develop compelling, engaging content for your event is going to be key. Engagement is, I heard somebody talk the other day to say, engagement is much more important than content. But as far as I'm concerned, engagement is content, right? It takes content to sort of create some sort of engagement amongst your participants. So when it comes to content development, a process beats a lack of a process every day of the week and twice on Sundays. And so I introduce a content development process. A lot of content professionals use this process. It's called the ADDIE process. ADDIE is an acronym. It stands for analysis, really sort of a needs analysis to understand who your audience and what their needs are. Then with that information, you can actually design your content. You can develop the individual content elements. How much of this is recorded, how much of this is live, what kind of format you're going to be using. Then you actually implement, that's the I of the ADDIE model. And then you evaluate your content to see if it really accomplishes your goals and objectives. So I introduce this content development process and walk you through that. Another thing we're going to talk about are some of the key features and benefits of virtual event platforms. There are features like a chat and question and answer features and whiteboards. You're familiar with some of these features. Again, I'm going to focus more on the technique of how to use these effectively, given the content that you have to work with. The bottom line here is, can you engage your audience early and often? The tools are actually only going to be as good as the person using them. So again, I place more emphasis on the technique over the tools. And oftentimes this is limited only to by your own sort of creativity. How creative can you be about using these tools to accomplish your objectives? One last thing, probably I mentioned it, we'll talk about is, and this is important too, how to repurpose your event after how to repurpose your content after your event in order to sort of extend the shelf life or the value of your event over the long term. So what a lot of people did initially when the pandemic hit was something we call, and not in a nice way, we call it lift and shift. They basically lifted a lot of their in-person content or a lot of their text-based content and just sort of put it on a website or up on an event platform. And that's really not going to be very effective. So this is about what we're going to talk about really is how to repurpose your content, not only on your virtual event platform, but across other platforms as well. Again, events are no longer thought of as a sort of a singular place in time, but a 24/7, 365 opportunity to build more community.
You have a special place that you're developing, correct, for this community development?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
You have a kind of a special platform that you're working on to extend the community
Oh,
aspects of this?
yes. So one of the things we're doing is we know that no course is going to address everybody's question, and oftentimes, like in a virtual event, when you put some content out there, it becomes obsolete very quickly. So we wanted to create a community of practice around virtual and hybrid events, and we're building a platform for people to connect with other professionals, to ask questions, get answered by some of these subject matter experts or some of these thought leaders that we're going to be bringing into the course as well. So the idea is to build a community that sort of supports the ongoing best practices around this. A couple of the other resources we're building into this is one of the things we talk about is conducting a needs analysis, or conducting, in particular, a SWOT analysis for your event to understand its strengths, its weaknesses, its opportunities and threats. So we're going to share how to do each one of those sort of things. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to evaluate your content so you can improve upon it over time.
Sounds like a great course, and it sounds like all of this is included. There's webinars as well as will people have access to the recordings as well?
Yeah, it's a lot of information. So we're trying to design in a way that each session of the 5 sessions provides some actionable information, and that it's supported by this online platform, this community of practice, so people continue to sort of develop as the discipline essentially develops as well.
Well, it sounds great, John. Thank you so much for meeting with me to tell our audience about this. And uh, again, thank you, and hope to see you in the course in the
Thank you
near
very
future.
much for the opportunity. Looking
Thank you.
forward to it.